the workshop started.
Excellent. Thanks, Madam Mayor, and thanks everyone who came in the audience and for attending tonight. We have representatives from the University of Fairbanks, Elena, with us. We also have Barrett from the State of Alaska DGGS division, and you may remember Barrett from the landslide response team. And then we also have Mike here with us from the Department of Homeland Security at the State of Alaska Emergency Management. So thanks to these guys for coming. This is part one of a two-part series. We'll also be here tomorrow evening at 5:30 with an emphasis on landslides. I'm going to kick it over to you, Barrett.
Okay, thank you very much for the introductions and for having us here today. I'm the Earthquake and Tsunami Hazard Program Manager at the Alaska Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys. Mike Lucio here is the Geohazards Mitigation Coordinator for the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And Elena is a tsunami modeler from the Alaska Earthquake Center at UAF. Today, we're going to go through half earthquake background and then half tsunami implications for Wrangell. And I'm going to start out and turn it over to Mike real quickly. Mike's going to talk about the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program and how the three of us form the Alaska component of the NTHMP program. Then Mike will turn it right back to me, and we'll start with some basics of plate tectonics and what that means for earthquakes in South Central and Southeast Alaska. They're kind of different animals, and so big 1964 style earthquakes are what we see in South Central and the Aleutians and around the Pacific Ocean. But we also have tremendously large earthquakes in Southeast Alaska, so we'll talk about the different. And then we'll focus specifically on a 2012 event, the Haida Gwaii earthquake, and how it produced a tsunami in a place where we don't normally expect tsunamis to be produced. And then I'll set the stage for landslide-generated tsunami events, and Elena will take over. So Mike, you up.
Hello, everyone. So this is Barrett. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Mike Lucio. So I'm with the DHSEM, Division of Homeland Security Emergency Management. And I took over the Geologic Hazards Coordinator position last year, just about a year ago. I've been doing emergency management with the state for about 4 years. I'm also a emergency medical technician, a firefighter by trade. So the Geologic Hazard Program at DHSEM is the emergency management component of the National Tsunami Hazard Mitigation Program. We are the what's called the primary grant recipient. So we received the grant from the National Oceanic Air Administration, NOAA, and NTHMP has been a program since 1995. Alaska, thanks to the efforts of Elena and others, has been in the program since the 90s. It's up to 28 states now, but Alaska is one of the longtime recipients of the program. So with that comes the emergency management component, and then comes the science component, and that's where Barrett and Elena come in. And the trio ultimately creates kind of that robust system. So NTHMP, what does it fund? In addition to funding the tsunami modeling, mapping, and inundation mapping, it also provides for outreach. So it allows us to come out to communities. We've been to numerous communities around the state. It also pays for things like tsunami sirens, which technically can be considered kind of an all hazards type siren. So a lot of communities on the coast have had their sirens funded through this program. It also provides for some of the brochures that communities have that provides the information that's brought from the science side of the house. We also do workshops every year around the state. We call them seismic tsunami operation workshops. The most recent one was in Ketchikan last year, and that one was focused heavily on the southeast part of the state, especially after the Tracy Arm landslip last August, which had just happened right before our workshop. So we go around the state every year. We're going out to the Aleutians next year. We're looking forward to that. So yeah, that's a really basic breakdown of NTHMP. Okay.
All right. Thanks for it.
Oh yeah. Okay, I got one more. So I have a couple of challenges to the community here, and I asked this morning as well when we met with the fire department, a couple of folks as well. There's going to be a lot of information in this presentation, a lot of newfound things, a lot of kind of stuff you already know. Wrangell is obviously not new to disasters. We're still dealing with the tragedy from 2023. I think that's still really fresh in a lot of people's minds. A lot of folks in this room were directly involved with that. So I asked you, what will you take away from this presentation? How will you act on the information you receive? And part of that is encourage that community participation. Alaska's goal is to become the most resilient state in the nation. And we see a lot more here than every other state. We see more earthquakes, we see more just natural disasters. Things happen here on a scale that the lower 48 simply, they see a lot, but when they talk about Alaska, it's on a whole nother level. So that is my challenge to you. Continue to talk about this to the community. We want everyone to be aware of what's going on, but we also want people to be well educated, understand what's going on. So we're not talking from a place of fear or a place of misconceptions or bad information. So that's really where we're going with that. And that's all I have. I will turn it over.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'll be here for questions after.
So we're gonna get straight into plate tectonics to set the stage for why Alaska is the most seismically active state in the US. That's a fact. And so on the left here is a cartoon version of the inner components of our Earth, and they're basically separated by density. So the farther in the Earth you go, pressures and temperatures are greater, and the materials are more dense. This cartoon on the left is not to scale, and really neither is the one on the right, but it does highlight that the brittle outer crust that we live on is very thin, like the skin of an apple, shell of an egg. It's very thin compared to the total thickness of the Earth. But it's important that we study that because the brittle crust is where we can store the energy to release in earthquakes. So, slight delay. Okay, so I mentioned that the pressures and temperatures inside the Earth are tremendous, and the Earth wants to cool down. And so heat from the inner core is making its way out of the Earth through the outer core. That heat is left over from the formation of the planet. It's also a product of the radioactive decay of the materials that make up Earth. So as that heat tries to escape, much like a pot of stew that you're boiling on the stove, the hottest part of it rises off the burner in the center of your pot until it reaches the surface where it can cool off. So it'll spread out the surface of your pot, and then it cools down, and the convection cell forms when the cooler material dives back into the Earth. This is what is driving the motion of the tectonic plates of the brittle upper crust that we live on. And we can think of the ocean floor as a conveyor belt. So at a spreading ridge, we'll talk about in just a minute, in the mid-ocean ridges, we create Earth's crust. And it spreads out from that spreading ridge until it is finally cool enough to dive back into the Earth. We have a couple different types of plate boundaries that I'll talk about, but in Alaska, we live in a very active plate boundary where two pieces of the Earth's crust in constant motion are slamming into one another. And so if we lump some of the biggest tectonic plates together, this is what a simplified version of the tectonic plates look like. The big bold lines are plate boundaries, and we can think of there being motion at all of these boundaries because none of these plates are still. Could you please turn your computer now? I'll hear myself talking. Thanks. So these red arrows at the plate boundaries describe the relative motion of these neighboring plates. In Alaska, these two arrows are pointing at each other. So the Pacific plate is running into the North American plate. In a mid-ocean ridge, like in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, we have a spreading center. So that's where we create the crust and we start the conveyor belt. In North or Southeast Alaska and in California, we have transform faults where we slide tectonic plates side by side next to one another. So no vertical motion. But we have really fast plate boundary faults on the western edge of the North American plate. And then finally, we have convergent tectonic plates where either two land masses slam together and form giant mountains like in the Himalayas, or in this case, in Alaska, one of the tectonic plates is much more dense than the neighboring plate. So it dives beneath the less dense plate, the North American plate. So in Alaska, tectonic Pacific plate, the subducting plate, is diving down beneath mainland Alaska and along the Alaska-Aleutian megathrust. That gives rise to active volcanoes and lots of earthquakes. So this is our little portion of the Ring of Fire you might have heard about. The Pacific Ocean basin is ringed by the Ring of Fire because of that tectonic plate boundary. So the plates move here in Alaska about 5.5 centimeters per year. And on the global scale, that's pretty fast. Your fingernails grow at about 2 centimeters per year. Your hair grows at about 6 centimeters per year. So over geologic time, that's a lot of motion. But if you look at them now in a static sense, they don't really look like they're moving. But we know that in between earthquakes for hundreds of years, we build up energy because these plates continue to move. So these teeth on the Alaska Aleutian megathrust just describe that the tectonic plate is dipping to the north under the North American plate. And we live along the Queen Charlotte Fairweather Fault system. So it's called the Fairweather Fault where it's on land, and it's the Queen Charlotte Fault when it's offshore. And it is the fastest oceanic continental transform strike slip fault in the world. And I'll point it out again later, but that's almost twice as fast as California San Andreas Fault. So in a single year, this is what about 30 to 50,000 earthquakes look like. This is a regular pattern of earthquakes for Alaska. This is just a snapshot from 2023. These earthquakes are colored by how deep they are in the Earth's crust. The red earthquakes are shallow earthquakes, so on the top 30 kilometers or so. The yellows are intermediate depths. And the maroons that you see a few of here are very deep, up to 200 kilometers deep. And that describes that picture we just saw of the tectonic plate diving down into the earth. As that tectonic plate dives into the earth, there are earthquakes within that plate. And that's why we have some very deep earthquakes. And of course, it matters how deep the earthquakes are as to the felt effects at the surface. So the shallower the earthquake is, the more it is likely to cause damage. The other important takeaway from this image is that these dots are sized according to the earthquake magnitudes. And you can tell just from looking that we have way more small earthquakes than we do big earthquakes. And that's a natural, it has to do with the friction holding the plates together and how the plates break, but that's a natural frequency magnitude relationship. We have lots and lots of little ones that do very little work. And rarely do we have big ones, but when those big ones happen, they're very energetic. You probably have heard of the magnitude scale. Generally, it's about 2 to 7s and 9s, or what we hear people talking about. We don't use the Richter scale anymore. We use a scale called the moment magnitude scale, and it describes how much energy is released in an individual earthquake. People are able to feel earthquakes above about magnitude 2 in ideal conditions. So as you go up that magnitude scale, we have fewer and fewer earthquakes. So there are lots more 2s and 3s, so on and so on, all the way up. And the frequency is about a order of magnitude. So 10 times fewer earthquakes every step up. So for every 10 magnitude 5s, you have 1 magnitude 6. The important part, though, is that the description of energy and those different earthquake magnitudes is exponential. So from a 5 to a 6, there's 32 times more energy in that magnitude 6 than that 5. Even though there's fewer of them, it does way more work. And so from jumping from a magnitude 5 to a magnitude 7, that magnitude 7 is about 1,000 times more energetic than the magnitude 5. So little earthquakes do not make us safe from big earthquakes. That's a really common misconception. But we live in an active plate boundary, and so we have all kinds of earthquakes. There's lots and lots of little ones. But we prepare for the rare, enormous earthquakes because they have the potential to produce tsunamis and a lot of potential to cause damage just from their strong shaking. I'm going to put that into perspective with this animation. And all of these were significant events when they occurred. So they caused damage, they disrupted people's daily lives. 5.8 is the green dot at the bottom. It's from Mineral, Virginia. Napa Valley earthquake cost millions of dollars in damage. But there's the magnitude 7 Haiti compared to the magnitude 5.8. And this is going to keep going for a while. So we're not even to the magnitude 8s yet, but already those 5s are inconsequentially small. There's a famous Aleutian Islands earthquake, magnitude 8.6 from 1946 that destroyed the Scotch Cap Lighthouse. The Tohoku Iki earthquake in Japan in 2011, magnitude 9.0. We learned about global subduction zone behavior in this magnitude 9.0 in 2011. Here is our claim to fame. We are home to the magnitude 9.2. It's the second largest ever recorded earthquake. Great Alaska earthquake. And then the Valdivia, Chile earthquake in 1960 was arguably two very large earthquakes back to back. But you can see from the total energy release, the significant increase in energy just from a magnitude 9.2 to a 9.5. So you hear a lot about moderate sized earthquakes, 6s and 7s, and they can cause damage, especially in places that have poor construction practices. But it's really the 8s and the 9s that are serious business, cause a lot of damage and produce tsunamis. And so the way we produce tsunamis is by loading the North American tectonic plate with elastic strain energy. So we can think of it kind of behaving like a big rubber sheet. I'll show you on the left panel is a 3-piece diagram. It's a time series. And then the top left, we can imagine that we just had an earthquake and everything is relaxed. These two tectonic plates are stuck together along this yellow line. Friction is holding them together. But remember, I said the tectonic plates are always moving. So even though they're stuck together at the contact patch here, both of these plates are still being forced to move. So far field forces continue that subduction such that the toe of the overriding plate is dragged down. So under the seafloor in Alaska, the seafloor trench is constantly moving down with the subduction of the Pacific plate. And this contact patch is now red, implying that friction holding them together is in jeopardy. Because at some point, that friction is going to be overcome by the total amount of plate motion. And when that friction is overcome, the overriding plate snaps back. And when it does that, not only does inland change elevation, so some parts drop down, some parts lift up. What's really important is what happens under the seafloor. And in a minute, I'll talk about the measurements that occurred in 1964. But I'll show you some videos first of what I just described. On the top right, the subducting plate is dragging the overriding plate down with it, storing energy in the overriding plate until eventually it's overcome. It snaps back and it lifts the entire ocean column. And so I showed you a map with a bunch of dots on it representing earthquakes. But a dot does not represent a significant earthquake because this rupture patch that I mentioned, this may be hundreds of miles down dip or down the plate interface and 500 or 800 miles along the seafloor trench. So hundreds of square miles of seafloor are going to be lifted in a few minutes. And so in 1964, the earthquake shaking lasted about 4.5 minutes. And that's why it took so long, because the rupture started in one place and then it traveled 500 miles to complete the rupture. And I'll show a picture of that in just a minute. But here's an analog model that shows a subduction zone with real friction and a simulated city over here. This is from Japan. But the point is, can't predict when there are going to be big ones or when there's going to be small ones. We just know that they're going to be continuously happening. So as we get to this upper limit of friction, we can still get little teeny earthquakes right before the big ones. So in no way do lots of little earthquakes make us safer from big earthquakes. I just want everyone to go home knowing that for sure. So in 1964, the rupture patch itself was 500 miles from the southwest edge of Kodiak up to Cape Yakutaga, and up to 175 miles in the plate interface or down dip direction. So that's a polygon I've not shown here, but it's about the same size as the red and the magenta polygons. The seafloor trench, where the two tectonic plates meet on the seafloor, moved out and up 15 meters during the 4.5 minutes of earthquake shaking. This entire red polygon was uplifted 5.5 meters or about 15 feet and this entire blue polygon subsided a maximum of about 2 meters. And so in addition to the earthquake shaking, you had huge regions of land, hundreds of square miles changing vertical elevation in just a few minutes. So that affected shorelines. There was additionally sediment compaction in certain places that caused land to drop even more than that 2 meters. So tremendous long-lasting effects after these major earthquakes. Where these earthquakes occur on the subduction zone interface is responsible for the direction of the energy. So where does it go? And this subduction zone continues around the Pacific Ocean basin through Kamchatka, which would be about over here, and then down into Japan. So when there are large subduction zone earthquakes in Japan or in Russia, we're on alert because those subduction zones are perpendicular to the direction of the wave travel that could be pointed at us. So when we get those huge earthquakes, we need to take them seriously. The good thing about waves that travel across the ocean is that some of the energy dissipates, but also we have a huge heads up about what's coming. Okay, so enough about the subduction zone earthquakes. I want to talk about your more local earthquakes on the Queen Charlotte Fairweather Fault. These are strike slip, transform fault earthquakes, and we're sliding those two plates side to side. So since 1900, we've ruptured the entire Queen Charlotte Fairweather system in magnitude 7 or greater earthquakes. Several of these, including the 1949, the 1958, and which other one? 1927.
27.
In 1927, were responsible for submarine slope failures that broke underwater communication cables. So again, this is the fastest oceanic continental transform fault in the world. It's almost twice as fast as California's San Andreas. So we have a picture on the bottom left of what mainland Alaska earthquake looks like, but if we take an oblique view at our stretch of the Pacific Ocean basin, we can see that most of the earthquakes concentrated out here on the actual fault system. And we here are about 130 miles from the closest source of those major earthquakes. And that's good news because that allows the energy to dissipate. So we're not likely to feel the same type of shaking as we would if we lived in Anchorage and we had the same magnitude earthquake directly beneath our feet. And so this cartoon on the right shows where we are here. kind of a lot to take in. But to our south is the Cascadia subduction zone. So much like the Alaska Aleutian subduction zone, huge tsunami-genic earthquake producer. Where we are, it's more of a transform fault, so sliding things side to side. And then north of us again is the Alaska Aleutian subduction zone. And I want to talk real quickly about the 2012 Haida Gwaii earthquake because this isn't an area where it's mostly strike slip fault, so we wouldn't expect the seafloor to be disturbed like a big subduction zone earthquake. But what happened in 2012 is that there was a small component of vertical motion on that predominantly transformed fault. And Elena will talk more about slip on the plate interfaces and seafloor deformation. But that 2012 earthquake, which turns out to be the worst considered earthquake scenario for tsunami inundation in Wrangell, the slip on that plate interface was up to about 6 meters in that earthquake, and it deformed the seafloor upwards of about 2 meters. I'm going to skip that animation, then briefly talk about the importance of the geologic substrate in response to earthquake shaking. So it really matters what kind of rock or what kind of sediment you're on when an earthquake happens as to how you're going to perceive that earthquake shaking and what kind of damage it might do. So in this image, the earthquake energy is moving from left to right, and these squiggles represent the speed of the earthquake and how that energy is related to the rocks. So when the rocks are hard, the earthquake energy can pass through them quickly. And so that means that the shaking is minimal. When you have soft sediments or you have saturated sediments, you slow down the earthquake energy, and you can't get rid of the energy. It has to go somewhere. And so that energy goes into amplified shaking. So these peaks are farther apart, but they're much bigger. So if we slow earthquake energy down, then we translate that into much stronger shaking. So lots of different effects from earthquake shaking, including liquefaction, which we saw in Anchorage in 2018. Wet sands lose their strength when they're shaken. And we can have certain types of clay along coastlines that are very slippery. We saw in the 1964 earthquake that an entire neighborhood, which is now Earthquake Park, slid into the ocean. And the scale of these fractures is pretty tremendous. So the point of this is that it doesn't really always take steep slopes to have big chunks of land moving where you wouldn't want them to move. And then lastly, the Cordilleran ice sheet that formed about 2.5 million years ago melted mostly away about 23 to 18,000 years ago. So longer ago than this, there was a lot of thick ice here. And as climate changed, we got rid of that ice, which means we unloaded the crust, took all the weight of that ice off of the crust of the earth. And so we're rebounding up even 18,000 years later. We moved all that ice away. We're still bouncing up. And the bouncing up of the crust causes the rocks to have a lot of fractures in them, which can lead to rock falls. But what's really important is that there's still ice in the alpine areas near here that feed glacial sediment into the rivers, that is then brought to the coast and deposited on these generally unstable slopes. So in addition to subaerial landslides like rock falls in Latuya Bay, where we make splashes that are thousands of feet tall, we can also have submarine slope failures. And this is from 1958. This was an earthquake triggered rock fall. And it is the highest tsunami ever recorded. And just recently, what Mike mentioned is Tracy Arm last year, we had a huge chunk of the mountainside was not on our radar. We didn't have it highlighted as any place that was more particularly dangerous than any other fjord. But a huge chunk of that mountain fell off and generated a wave that nearly topped the world record. But this is now the second largest tsunami ever recorded in Alaska, again, in the same type of environment. So again, we don't know where these types of things are going to happen necessarily. This was not creeping beforehand, so it was a surprise. So have a lot of hazards to deal with. So lastly, while Elena is getting ready, just want to show how the coupling of water and sediment can lead to a surface disturbance with an underwater movement. So it might not seem too intuitive, but anytime something underwater moves, the surface of the water is going to follow. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Elena. We might have time for a question while she gets her presentation up.
Any questions? We'll have time at the end also, I think.
You mentioned being on high alert if there was activity on the Kamchatka Peninsula or in Japan. How long realistically would it take for seismic activity to influence Wrangell in terms of a tsunami if it were to occur overseas?
In the open ocean, the tsunamis travel as fast as a jet plane, so 500 miles an hour. So it would, from Japan or Kamchatka, it would reach Hawaii in about 4 hours, and it would reach Southeast Alaska in 5 to 9 hours. So not only would we have the warnings and the time, we have confirming observations in Hawaii that wave is on the way.
And we're very fortunate in Alaska. We have the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer. So we, in some ways, we have home field advantage. So National Tsunami Warning Center, once they get the preliminary data out, because their systems alert right away, and they'll start trying to triangulate the trajectory where that energy is going. So in like Chaka, the energy went south away from us, fortunately, but every place is different, every event's different. But they're pretty fast at getting things figured out, and then they start their coordination with the other agencies.
No, you stop sharing. No, you stop. Any other questions while we're waiting?
Hi. My name is Elena. I work at the University of Alaska Fairbanks at the Geophysical Institute. I've been doing tsunami modeling and mapping for coastal Alaska since 1998. We mapped about 65 communities since then. So now it's your turn. So we came to Wrangell to present draft maps of tsunami inundation this morning. And I strongly believe that only a person can only make like an intelligent decision in tsunami preparedness and mitigation if they understand the basics of that phenomenon. So my goal today is to do like Tsunami 101. Unfortunately, it's only like 30 minutes for that, but I'll try. So I will be like giving you some facts and information, and I hope you will learn something today, and I will be asking questions in between, so pay attention.
Yeah.
So, oh, by the way, this is the tsunami inundation line, the high water mark in 1964 at the Coast Guard base in Kodiak. Fortunately, people were able to record those waves on the wall. They put marks every hour or so because the waves have been arriving like with 1 hour interval. And the highest wave, I think it was the third one. So it's the first wave is not necessarily the largest one, and you need to remember that. The second thing that we learned from that is that tsunami action happens for 12 to 24 hours. So it's never one way in, out, and done. No, it will be hours until it's over. So yeah, things to remember. So, like just I put important thing in the front so people, like if you fall asleep, in case, so you remember the important thing from from the beginning. So Barrett and I here in Cordova doing the same type of presentation a year ago, and the first thing is that those two horrible tragedies that happened in 2004 and 2011, the Indian Ocean tsunami that killed 230,000 people in one day, and the Japanese tsunami that killed 20,000 people in one day, they pretty much reminded us that the magnitude 9 earthquake and tsunami, they have a global reach. Nobody is protected, right? It will reach every coastline on this planet. And even more, people travel these days, right? And in Indian Ocean tsunami that happened the day after Christmas in 2004, more than 300 tourists from Sweden died. These people come to Thailand for Christmas vacation. They had no idea what it means that the water goes away for no reason. On a beautiful sunny day, they see the water going away and they decided to go and look for fish. One little girl from Great Britain told her mom, this is a tsunami. We need to evacuate because she learned about that in her science class. Guess what? This girl saved the entire resort. Nobody died there. And she was actually later invited to the White House by President Clinton. And she is called Angel of a Beach. So this is how basic information saves lives. She saved lives to like so many people. And another thing that we learned from those disasters is that we don't know everything. Every next huge earthquake will teach us something new. That's why we kind of think, yes, we don't know everything. We need to be humble and we need to be prepared. And to be prepared means to be knowledgeable. And this is what we are doing today. So Alaska is the biggest tsunami producer in the United States, but unfortunately for us, these tsunamis come pretty quickly to our coastlines. We don't have that luxury of several hours when, the tsunami travel time, let's say even for low 48, they have more time than we have. And in this case, knowing what to do rather than waiting for someone, officials or someone else to tell you what to do, it's pretty much the difference between life and death. That's it. It's so simple. And the most important thing is why every time we go to a coastal community, we go to school presentations, we present to middle school, to high school. It's a little bit challenging to present that to elementary school children for obvious reasons, but we need to keep doing that because tsunamis are pretty rare. And those disasters maybe will not happen in our lifetime, maybe not in our children's lifetime, but they will definitely happen in our grandchildren's lifetime. We need to keep transferring the knowledge, just keep talking about them, keep kind of bringing that again and again. And it's pretty sad that we don't have any tsunami memorials in Alaska. I only aware of one stone in Kodiak next to McDonald's that says the 1964 tsunami came to this point, which is like if you don't know if it's there, you will never find it, right? But in Japan, however, there are so many tsunami memorials everywhere along the coastline. And they just keep building those memorials and they keep building those museums so people remember. And in Alaska, our hazard is defined by two major factors. First, of course, this is what Barrett described, seismically active subduction zone. But we have glacial fjords, and this is another big thing. Why? Because when you have glacial fjords that bring those unstable sediment into the rivers, like Sticken River, for example, right? And all those earthquakes that Barrett mentioned, each of them broke cables near Wrangell, each of them. And so this is why we have so-called near-field tsunami hazard. So pretty much we're basically sitting on top of tsunami hazard in Alaska. And in 1946, it's all started from that earthquake. I mean, the tsunami warning system in the United States, it did not exist before that earthquake. That earthquake was like, wake up, guys, after 150 people died in Hawaii from Alaskan tsunami. It was obvious that something needs to be done, right? Then this is how the tsunami warning system was created. The 64 tsunami, look at that. 92% of all people who died in this event died from tsunamis. Not from the earthquake, but from tsunamis. But what's most interesting is that 76% of them died from local landslide tsunamis, underwater landslide tsunamis. This is what the major hazard in Wrangell is. And so we already saw that. Major hazard is underwater landslide tsunamis. In Lituy Bay, as Barrett mentioned, we have the world record. By the way, I forgot to convert everything to feet, so just multiply it by 3 if you want feet, right? 524 meters, meaning like 1,700 feet. It was the highest wave ever recorded on Earth. What's most interesting that those waves happened in the same exact place many times before. Basically, it means that it will happen again and again and again. Because these is like places that are susceptible to those failures because of the earthquakes and because of glaciation. Recently, we had that event in Tanfjord. It's the 5th largest ever recorded, almost 600 feet wave height. And Tracy Arm, look at that, 481 meters, so times 3, it's a little bit below 1,500 feet, just last year. And then we have that very arm slide that's being monitored in Prince William Sound. That's a huge chunk of rock sitting there, waiting to fail at some point. We don't know when. But we monitor it, we know when the slide kind of starts moving, and we have tire gauges installed. And people in VT are pretty much aware of what's happening. So at least this one is being monitored. But there are so many of them that we have no idea when they fail and how big they are going to be. So who knows what tsunami means? Oh, okay. So it's a Japanese word, right? It has 2 characters, tsu, harbor, and nami, wave. So what would be your question now? Now you know what it means, and then you think what? No, okay. Like my question would be why harbor? When you think about tsunami, what do you imagine? You imagine a wall of water, like in those Hollywood movies, right? A wall of water coming from the ocean, right? Killing everyone. Why harbor? Because in Japan, many, centuries ago, they observed those waves. Let's say fisherman goes outside, to fish on a beautiful sunny day, and nothing happens to him in the open ocean. Why? I'll tell you later why. And then he comes back and he finds this village destroyed totally. And he had no idea what happened. They thought it's like a harbor monster that did that. And that's why they call it harbor wave. They thought that it's something that happened in the harbor. They had no idea that it was the wave that silently passed under them in the open ocean, came to the harbor, and destroyed everything. They had no idea. So how it works? We have three stages in a tsunami life. First stage is when tsunami is made by underwater earthquake. This is what Barrett showed you. Then we have that second stage when tsunami travels in deep ocean, and this is when we call it like invisible monster, because you cannot feel it in the open ocean. And finally, it comes to stage 3 when tsunami hits land. Okay, let's go to stage 2 because stage 1 we already discussed. So this is the most important thing you need to remember today about tsunamis. So they are traveling faster in deep water and they slow down in shallow water. And another interesting thing is that if we look at that wave, and of course the scale is not real, right? But we call those high points, we call them crest, right? And in between we call it trough. So in the open ocean, when the wave length, which is distance between the crest, is about 60 miles, then the wave height is only 1 foot. So imagine that you are sitting like here in the trough, right, on your boat. So 30 miles to the right, there is the crest of a tsunami, which is 1 foot high. And 30 miles to the left, there is 1 foot high crest. Can you see that? You cannot. In the open ocean, you cannot see that wave at all. It's invisible. And as I mentioned, because the speed of tsunami depends only the depth, because gravity is a constant, right? We have the deeper the water, the faster the wave. Remember that.
Remember that.
Yeah, remember that. So, stage 2, as Barrett mentioned, it goes at the speed of 0.747. This is why it takes tsunami about 5.5 hours to go from Alaska to Hawaii. Exactly the same time you need to fly from Anchorage to Honolulu. Easy to remember, right? But they are not dangerous in deep water. They are pretty much invisible. So the wave height is like 1 foot, and the distance between two crests can be miles. Just invisible. It's because the entire water column moves kind of as a whole thing. It's not just the surface wave. And at the same time, they are able to transport huge amount of energy. So look at that. So this is that famous earthquake that started the tsunami warning system in the United States. 5 hours after that earthquake, people went to the Gila Harbor. They saw the water going away, and they went to look like what's happening on the bottom. So interesting, right? Nobody had an idea what's coming next. The next came the wave, and they couldn't run away. 150 people died, including pretty much the entire elementary school in Lapahoehoe. If you've been in the Big Island, or if you plan to go there, you can visit that place. It's heartbreaking. So, and why? Why can they, retain that enormous force while being invisible? It's because the tsunami energy goes all the way from the surface to the bottom. And this animation, we've tried to kind of demonstrate this concept. I mean, it's not easy, but let's see. So basically, this is the energy. You see how it goes? It's not your regular ocean waves like on the surface. It's not like that. It's the entire column is just moving together. And this is why we can detect tsunamis by ocean bottom recorders. If you put a pressure sensor on the bottom, because the energy goes all the way down, that bottom pressure sensor can detect it in the middle of the ocean and can send a signal to satellites, and they send signal to the tsunami warning center. And this is how we do tsunami warnings, right? Okay. And so now finally we get to the stage where it becomes from invisible to devastating. So what happens? Why? Like why the invisible becomes so bad? So look at this. In the open ocean, the distance between two crests 130 miles, and we can see it, right? And it's deep. When tsunami gets into shallow water, it slows down. Why?
It's
Friction, energy, friction.
What did you say?
because it comes in contact with the ocean floor.
Friction plays a little role, but what's the most important thing? You remember the slide I told you to pay attention?
Energy is going upwards as opposed to.
Yeah, it will be the next stage, but now why it slows down? Guys, you remember?
Somebody said it.
Oh, who said that?
Water shower.
Yes, the deeper the water, you remember, the deeper the water, the faster the wave, right? When it goes into shallow, it slows down. When it slows down, you're so right about energy. Right, thank you. So what happens that now energy is now compressed into that wedge and it has nowhere to go, it goes up. That's it, right? So this is why it's so dangerous in shallow water. And yeah, wave height increases rapidly. So now this cartoon shows you a generic town in Alaska in winter. And when you see something like that, let me see, tell me what you do. When you see something like that, what do you do? Yeah, it says here, you run, right? You don't, but where do you run? You run opposite, right? You don't run to look at the fishes, right? You run opposite, right? Nice, okay. This is unfortunately how it's a very dramatic video, but I mean I show you it here so to show that tsunami, it's not a wave when it hits land. I mean, wave is never a good word to describe tsunami. You know it already, it's not a wave, right? It's not your usual kind of ripple thing. So when it hits land, it becomes very bad, ugly sea of debris that keeps going like a bulldozer and destroying everything. And it keeps going for a long time because you remember the wavelength, it's pretty long between the two crests. So it can be an hour before the water goes like back, before it starts receding. So only like reinforced concrete building and like this one is like pretty much like paper because it will be destroyed like in a second. Right? So reinforced concrete buildings in the coastal area, it's the only place to be in a tsunami if you don't have time to run to higher ground. So you need to locate those places. So what is the cost of underestimating tsunami hazard? This is one of the horrible examples of the Japanese tsunami when they underestimated the hazard and therefore all their inundation maps or hazard maps or evacuation maps were not adequate. And I will show you why. For example, in this town, that pink area, it's everything that was flooded by that tsunami. But in this spot, they had the disaster management building. And of course, it was built in the safe zone, or as they thought was a safe zone, right? They underestimated the hazard, therefore they built that building in that area. Otherwise, nobody would put the disaster management building in the hazard zone. The good news about that place is that here at that spot, they have so-called vertical tsunami evacuation building. It's designed specifically for people to get to the top if they don't have time to go to high ground. And you can see that water, that red arrow shows where water went in this case. And this arrow shows at the height of the tsunami wall that was supposed to protect the town. So you can see that tsunami wall was not protective at all because the water went all the way to here. But people who went to the roof, they were safe, fortunately, in this event. 5 minutes, okay. So talking about energy maps. So this is the energy map. And you can tell me now why it's not kind of nice and uniform, why there are so many strange kind of rays going here and there. So
Tides. Current and tides.
No,
The generation of the bottom.
guys, you have that magic slide. Remember the magic slide? The depth. Everything is about depth. The depth of the ocean determines where tsunami goes. It's all about that. It's the depth of the ocean. Let me show you the similar thing about So this is interesting thing. It's Crescent City, right? It gets that beam of energy every single time because there is that underwater mountain here that reflects that energy towards Crescent City. And this is what happened to Crescent City in 2011. Very bad destruction of the harbor. Okay, so let me just go quickly through that animation because this is interesting. This is the 2 feet wave coming into Santa Cruz Harbor, like about 10 hours after the earthquake in Japan. And so you see how little the wave is, and you see what happens with the 2 feet, and tell me why. Guys, but see that power, the energy. Remember that tsunami energy goes where? All the way to the bottom, right? So it's not just that little thing at the surface moving, right? It's the entire channel moving. So the energy from that 2 feet, it's not just the 2 feet at the surface, it's the entire channel kind of pushes those bolts. Okay, so this is the 64. Guys, now you know everything, please. It will run 3 times, and you need to think about 2 things, right? First of all, where energy goes and why. And second of all, why the speed of that tsunami in different parts is so dramatically different. So that animation goes for, let's say, 6 hours. This is exactly how much time we need to get to Hawaii, like 5.5, 6 hours, right? So what can you tell about energy? Where the major energy went in this case? So this is your tsunami source, right? The energy, I just tell you because I read that paper. Yeah, it actually the first paper I ever read about tsunamis a long time ago. It was a paper by Professor Kajura in Japan, and it's called Energy of Tsunami. The energy of tsunami goes perpendicular to the tsunami source. So if your tsunami source is here, energy goes this way. Imagine that you have a tsunami coming from the western part of the ocean. Do we need to worry in Southeast Alaska if your source is here? If it's perpendicular, yeah, you're right. We don't need to worry because the energy will go perpendicular to that source, right? So pretty much you look at the Aleutian subduction zone, you find that tsunami kind of spot, and you know where the energy will go. It's perpendicular. What about speed? Do you know why, for example, in 5 hours it passed Hawaii and not even halfway through Bering Sea?
Deeper than water.
Deeper than water. So let's see. The previous one, look at the speed. You see that shelf? It goes fast until here, and here it's pretty much stops. It's like boom, and then slows down. It's because of that. Please run it again so you can see in action. Yeah, 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes left. Let me. Okay, it slows down. You see it here. Okay. So what's next for us here? Oh, the slides. The final thing. In Alaska, we have them all. Everything you can imagine. Underwater slides from continental shelf, fjords and river deltas like Sticky River, and we have subaerial slides from fjords and volcanoes. And this is the scariest thing ever that I've seen in my life. In Tracy Arm, one day before the collapse of that chunk, you see that chunk? It's not there anymore, that huge chunk of the mountain. There was a cruise ship standing next to the glacier. The next morning, there was a 1,500 feet wave in that spot. And this is that chunk that collapsed, right? 84 million square yards. This is the height of that thing, 3,000 feet. And it splashed on the opposite side of the fjord, 1,700 feet. And actually 6 miles from that slide, there was little island. Let me show you here. It's called Sawyer Island. 100 feet high. It was totally scraped off any vegetation by that wave. And this animation will show you how it actually went. So the slide drops into the water, splashes it on the, so this is your 481 meters times 3 splash. And then in the next thing, you will see that Sawyer Island. So it starts going, in the fjord, splashing on both sides, enormous wave. And this is that island, Sawyer Island, 6 miles away, completely overtopped. This is one of the major hazards in Southeast Alaska, those unstable slopes that can collapse in an event like that. Okay. Finally, if you on the beach or near the ocean and you feel strong ground shaking, or you see water going away for no reason, or you hear some very strange sound from the ocean, you need to move immediately to high ground. Don't wait for any announcements, or locate like a reinforced concrete building in the coastal zone where you can get to the upper floor. And don't return until all clear, because it can be 12 hours or longer. Stay tuned to your radio. No radio is good to have. You can always send text to Tsunami Warning Center and follow it. And yeah, as I said, evacuate vertically. Use multi-story concrete buildings. And important thing, if you are in the sea and tsunami warning is issued for your harbor, don't get there. Stay there for a while until you're kind of out of water and food. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes before we start our assembly meeting. Any questions?
I'm just so grateful for that, because I don't know how many people I've talked to. Oh, we're so protected because we're so far from the ocean.
So much.
And I tell them, Zarembo could fall into the ocean. Hello. No, I'm so thank you for that.
Yeah, you are not protected, guys. I'm so sorry. Inconvenient truth. I wish I could spend
Yes.
more time, because
If we go to the top of Mount Dewey, do we stand a good chance of surviving?
you don't need to go that far. You're pretty much okay, like here on the hill.
I live on the hill, but I.
Yeah, I mean, when we publish the content location maps, you will see where the safe zone is. So that's why we're here. We will publish the maps. We will keep working with the community on your tsunami brochure. Yeah, that I showed this morning, and hopefully, like every household will have that brochure, and we will be like totally prepared.
So more information to come, and Mike is working with the fire department on sirens and evacuation routes, signage and all that.
Yeah,
So,
we'll be back.
Yeah.
Plus we just love Ryan, so yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I have a question. After the slide, there was a lot of monitoring of the areas around water, looking for unstable areas. We have a warning system out on the road. I'm just curious if you have any of that in that of areas that you consider unstable, or do you just consider it all unstable?
You mean in Alaska or just around Wrangell?
What was that?
Do you mean map everywhere in Alaska or just here?
Well, it's just in this area. I live right across from Evelyn. I mean, it's very close, and I can see areas where I'm going. And it falls into very deep water on that side. And I just wondered if in all of those studies that you did after the slide, if there were areas that you identified for a potential slide.
We can.
We'll be presenting that tomorrow.
Tomorrow at 5:30.
They'll be giving the landslide hazards basis and village talk tomorrow about where the mapped regions are.
Oh, good to know.
And that will be
Yeah.
5:30 PM here.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one last thing that we didn't say explicitly is that as far as the earthquakes go, the Cascadia megathrust rupture is the biggest tectonic source of tsunamis that you need to worry about here. And then what we considered in our report is collapse of the Stikine River Delta, submarine slope failure, because we can see that there have been failures there in the past. We've seen that all those big earthquakes on the Queen Charlotte Fairweather system cause submarine landslides. And so that's your major source of hazard considered in this report. And tomorrow they're going to talk mostly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but mostly about the subaerial potential landslides that would splash into the water. So we didn't consider any of the subaerial landslides. We only focused on the submarine landslides.
Because we don't know where they are, right?
Yeah.
So this is the big issue, like, they are not mapped, right? And it can be pretty much any unstable slope, and it doesn't even need to be a huge earthquake to trigger that, like last year in Tracy Arm. Just
All right, thank you.
so much, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.